Hey there, I'm Christopher Dorobek, the Dorobek Insider, and welcome to GovLoop's Dorobek Insider, where we focus on 6 words, helping government do its job better, a special edition of GovLoop's Dorobek Insider today. We are live. We do this each month in an effort to bring smart people together and share ideas because we believe that the real power of information comes when it's shared, and we're going to be doing that today. Today, we're talking about a subject that is getting a lot of discussion, IT modernization, and we have a great group of folks to talk about these issues. Joanne Wojtek, she is Program Manager for NASA's Solution for Enterprise-Wide Procurement. We all know it as SEWP. Ann Bruner, she is CIO, Assistant Director for Information Services Division at the Department of Licensing for the State of Washington out west. Bridget Gower, she is Director of NIH's Information Technology Acquisition and Assessment Center. We all know it as NITAAC. And Chris Boneman, he is Chief Technology Officer for Software AG Government Solutions. And also Francesca Alatresh of GovLoop, who led the most recent GovLoop guide. It's called IT Modernization, How Government Does IT. She will be joining us in just a moment. And as I mentioned, the GovLoop guide, well, by joining us today, you get a copy of that guide right there from your screen, and you can download it from there. I've also posted a link on my Twitter feed. You can find me on Twitter at @CDorobek, and I've posted a link there so you can find it and share it with others. A few business items before we get right into it. GovLoop's Dorobek Insider Live is brought to you today by Software AG. And it is GovLoop. We'd love to hear from you to make sure we're addressing the topics that matter and helping you do your job better. If you're joining us live, you can submit questions and comments as we move forward, and we will address as many of those as you can. And you guys have been very eager. You've already submitted a bunch of questions, so we will get to those, and a bunch of good ones, too. So we'll get to those coming up in just a moment. Also, in case you missed something, not to worry, we'll send you an on-demand version of this discussion in the days ahead. And a number of you will ask, so we won't be using any slides today. It's just us talking. That being said, we are busy taking notes throughout this program, and we will have a post pulled from the discussion with highlights posted on GovLoop's Dorobek Insider. And if you have any questions or problems as we move forward, just click on the Help button, and one of our GovLoopians will be there to help you out. With that, let's jump into this. I often joke that I've been covering government IT since the Lincoln administration. It's less and less of a joke these days, but as long as I've been covering it, I've heard people say the technology that the government agencies use is old, outdated. They use other words that I probably won't use among family company. But in the past year, there's been a lot of discussion around IT modernization. And in fact, just this week, the Trump administration published its budget proposal for fiscal 19. And guess what's in there? Well, you got it, IT modernization. In fact, the headline in Federal Computer Week reads, Trump budget stresses modernization and cyber. And the story notes that the administration has rolled out a $210 million IT modernization fund and put cybersecurity front and center of its $4.4 trillion budget request. With that, let's dive into this a bit more. I mentioned the GovLoop guide, IT Modernization, How Government Does IT. And I actually, before we go into it, wanted to quote a little bit of this because the guide notes that modernization is a serious commitment. It takes a serious commitment, cross-agency collaboration and persistence. And although many government entities have already started modernization projects, there are many frustrations and challenges they will likely encounter along the way if they haven't already. Sounds really fun, doesn't it? Well, Francesca Alatresh of GovLoop, she led the creation of the GovLoop guide. Francesca, frustrations and challenges. Sounds like a really fun thing, and yet everyone knows that this is something that's really important, don't they?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, absolutely. And you definitely hit the nail on the head there. A lot of frustrations when it comes to IT modernization in government. And as you were saying, it's a hot topic. It's the latest buzz in the Trump fiscal 19 budget, with the recent passage of the MGT Act that provides funding for the Technology Modernization Fund. But yeah, a number of challenges. A lot of these government modernization projects fail for a number of reasons. So in our most recent guide on IT modernization, we discussed some of the challenges that agencies encounter, as well as some successful case studies that government entities are using to navigate these challenges. So just to discuss some of those frustrations and challenges, like we were mentioning, we discussed, we picked a top 5. So the top 5 that we name in this guide are, overly complex IT governance, which prevents leaders from making informed business decisions when it comes to IT modernization. Then there's, costly legacy technology that we hear about all the time, where IT staffs have to focus so much more in terms of budget and time on operations and maintenance, and this seriously hinders innovation. Then we have this, what we call data center sprawl, which is basically an overabundance of data centers that create a lot of redundancies and extra costs to government. We also have this, pernicious problem of the lack of talent in the IT workforce, leaving government scrambling to staff and manage these significant modernization undertakings. And lastly, poor IT change and disaster management, where agencies are either ill-equipped to handle the changes that come with modernization or handle any, crises that can occur. And I know that a central focus of today's discussion is also about prioritizing what needs to be modernized and what doesn't. And so to give you an example from the guide, the state of Washington wanted to provide more accountability and transparency for their IT spend. And they had very specific goals in mind, and as a result, decided to implement a technology business management framework, or TBM, which is an increasingly popular set of best practices for running IT more like a business and having more data-led business decisions and goals. And this seems to be a more popular trend given the President's 2019 fiscal budget also requests funding for a TBM program office within GSA, so this is becoming increasingly popular. And as of now, Washington State still holds the record for the largest public sector TBM implementation to date. And in the guide, we also have some great insights from former federal CIO Tony Scott, who, as most of us know, could be kind of described as one of the founding fathers of the MGT Act. So he discusses the implementations of the Act and where agencies can go from there in terms of their modernization efforts. But overall, by understanding these IT modernization challenges for government and how other agencies and departments overcame, we really want to help government navigate their IT modernization projects in a more effective manner. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what our other speakers have to say today about navigating IT modernization.
Awesome. Francesca Alatresh from GovLoop, and she wins the award. She's used pernicious. I think in all our time of doing this, it's the first time that word's been used, so awesome job. Let me reintroduce the rest of the group. Joanne Wojtek, she is Program Manager with NASA SEWP, Ann Bruner with the State of Washington, Bridget Gower with NITAAC, and Chris Boneman with Software AG Government Solutions. And Ann, I'm going to start with you because Francesca mentioned you guys and the work that you are doing. Let me have you start off and talk about, because I think IT modernization is a little bit one of those words that everyone takes a little bit differently, and what it actually means. There's more and more association. I kind of hear people, when they say IT modernization, they're talking about cloud. Talk about a little bit about what IT modernization means for you guys and how you're approaching it.
Modernization, in particular for the Department of Licensing, we've had over 300 legacy components that we've been maintaining for a long time. And it's not just about the components themselves. I'll be perfectly honest. There was in our department where there were manual paper processes that were taking months to process a particular business license. So we weren't looking just at systems or at cloud technology as a whole. We were also looking at modernizing the business so that it could be better at supporting the customers who come to us and helping them to feel successful in getting things done in a timely manner. So it's not just a technology thing when we talk about modernization. So I think that's an important aspect, no matter what kind of modernization you're doing, to realize that it goes out in lots of different ways into the business itself.
Because you don't want to just be putting fancier technology on a process that's broken, right? And then you're just like the old lipstick on a pig, right?
That's correct. In fact, we have a lot of lean practices that we do within our organization, and one of the first things about the lean, when we go through a lean session is there's a pause about that you can't talk about the technology to go, because people like to jump exactly to, well, if we could only collect that data element, or if you could just fix this thing, we could have it better. But we pause at that point to take a look at what is the process. And how can we lean out the process and take out the things that aren't necessary, and take out the or add things that are helpful, and really put on the voice of the customer in there to help us to make good decisions. Then after they lean that all out, then we talk about how does that apply then in the technology.
I love that. I'm going to ask you about money in just a second, but let me bring other folks in. Bridget Gower, as I mentioned, director of NITAAC. Bridget, IT modernization, why does it matter? What does it mean?
IT modernization this is Bridget. Thanks for bringing me in, Chris. IT modernization is a necessary thing for the federal government. I struggle with it because I manage IT systems, and trying to keep up with the security, trying to keep up with new demands, and trying to work with in reducing and reducing staffing needs and automating things that I've got federal staff to do. As we get to be a leaner federal government, we've got to think of smarter ways to do things, and this is actually a really great time to start looking at that through the IT modernization.
And a great time because time and place, because is this, I mean, it feels a little bit like an opportunity because the federal government has so much old stuff. It feels like a really almost an opportunity to maybe skip a couple generations of technology and really come up to have a more modern framework, right?
Absolutely, and you've got a lot. You've got, as you've seen, the president is really behind this, and so we've got an opportunity to with the Management Act to use this momentum to establish a plan on how we're going to start modernizing our systems and keep it going, because it's not a one-time thing.
Chris Bonneman with Software AG. Chris, why does modernization matter?
Yes. What we have seen from a modernization perspective is that our government systems have really changed, like our needs for those. If you look at our citizens who interact with a lot of our different agencies, the way that they want to interact has changed drastically over the last 20 years. What the internet has brought us has really been revolutionary, and our expectations for how we interact with our services has changed with that. And then that changes within our workforce then as well, as how do we as employees want to be able to address our systems. And then if we look at our historical government systems, what we call legacy systems, a lot of times those have gone through a long, rigorous process and kind of built to last mentality, but not really approached it from a built to change. And so our needs have changed. And so as we start addressing how do I go through and address mobility, how do I address new business processes, as was mentioned earlier, how do I lean out those processes and adjust for what my current needs are, I need to go through and figure out how do I free up my money, how do I prioritize where I'm going to make those changes to it, and then obviously everyone's trying to take advantage of the cloud.
And Chris, I know a lot of the systems, the back ends are really old, antiquated, and I actually don't think, I saw somebody posted on Facebook, they were flying through and some airline had its airport terminal and it was all Linux. It wasn't Linux, it was like a COBOL. It was something, an old programming language, and they just, was still in use. So I don't think the federal government is completely that different, but a lot of those are hard to make mobile, they're not as secure, right? Is that the big reason why we're spending all this time, energy, effort, and money focused on these challenges?
Well, there's definitely an aspect. Any agency that still has anything running on a mainframe, there's a definite problem there, right? There's a high cost to be able to go through and do that, and then there's a limited number of vendors at this point that can go through and support those legacy systems, and so that definitely has impact. But we've also seen customers, both at the federal and state and local, that have then taken those workloads and then just moved on over to a modern, Intel type of architecture so they can kind of decrease that operating risk. And then they've been able to add wrappers around it so they can expose those legacy systems that have a lot of business logic built into them, but then expose it out to an API so that all the new modern development they're doing can do that. And there's more than one agency that we've done that with that have still leveraged that historical investment, but then enabled mobility, they enabled things around like the ACA, et cetera, to be able to connect to these old systems in a current modern architecture. And then you can wean out the back-end systems over time rather than being like everyone's got to rush and do a massive changeover.
We're going to talk, and I have 2 or 3 questions about connecting the old to the new, so we're going to come back to that in a little bit. But before I do that, Joanne Wojtek with SEWP, NASA SEWP, why does modernization matter?
So I don't know, and I say that because it's just a word, and I'm always the cynic in here. I'll start by saying, while I'm the cynic, I'm actually going through my systems or getting updated this year. We're actually having a whole new system put in, but there's a reason I'm able to do that. I have a budget for it, and you mentioned funding, and I think that's important. I also have a system that was built.
I have about 7. I have about 7 questions on budget stuff, so we will definitely come back to that in just a moment because a lot of people are thinking about that.
But I think whenever I hear things like modernization or data center consolidation, the first question pops into my mind is why? Are people just saying I'm doing this, or do they have an actual plan? Is it being driven by, to be a little bit cynical here, is it being driven by the private industry trying to get money from the government by saying, well, you have to do this and what is this? So I think we have to step back sometimes and look at it. And I don't think the government is that bad off as some people say. We get online all the time with, I do things with my state, licensing online. There's IRS taxes. You do a lot of things online now. Social Security is all online. There's a lot of things that business that citizenry interacts with that are in fact in line. Now, are there things behind the scenes that are old and cranky and need to get updated? Sure, but it's hard to do that when you have to get your business done and you have to balance the two. You still have to make things run. NASA has a unique, I can't speak for NASA, but I have been in meetings where they talked about, people want to get rid of their old Windows NT systems, but there's a satellite out there with it running, so they have to keep it running because you can't bring the satellite in to fix it. So there are different reasons you can't modernize, and so just to say, oh, we all just have to modernize is a little easy to say. I think you have to say, what is the purpose? When do you have to do it? How are you going to get the funding? How are you going to make sure that it actually is worthwhile? And also handle the issues that you mentioned, security, support. Those are certainly reasons to modernize, but you have to be careful that you do it in a way that makes sense and that you can support with the money it takes, because it takes money.
And I'm going to go back to Ann yes, I'm going to go back to Ann and talk because we have a question from Abraham. I'm sorry I'm mangling your name, but he says, how about the budget? How about budget if we don't have enough money for modernization? How did you guys deal with that? How do you guys deal with the money issue?
Well, I think it's certainly a conversation with your stakeholders about realizing the full cost of what you're doing. For many years, in Department of Licensing, they were spending most of their resources on just fixing the bugs. And as we heard from someone else say, that they weren't even getting to what is the new business part of enhancements that their business is asking of them. And so I think it's getting real about what is the cost of a legacy system. It's like having an old car that you're continuing to have to put in the money on all these old parts when the body is still rusting away on the outside, and pretty soon none of it's functional on the outside to even transport you, but boy, you got a good carburetor and you've got good wheels and so forth. So I think it's really getting honest with your stakeholders and also with our legislature. And I think too, it's the individuals that you serve have a great deal of power to bring to bear about the services that they are demanding. And boy, I'll tell you, our customers are getting smarter and smarter every day. They have that mini computer in their hand, their smartphone, and they're able to conduct a lot of different kinds of business using that smartphone, and they're demanding it from us in government. So yep. We have to be able to meet that demand to some degree, not be out front, but we have to be able to help them because they're the ones, talking to the legislature. They're the one making the votes, and they're the ones that are saying, hey, I need you to deliver better service. So it's through that I think that honest conversation around the money helps then to secure the funding through the different means to make the modernization work.
Joanne, I think that, yeah, go Chris.
Yeah, so one thing I would add into that is that we've seen a lot of success for organizations as they increase the visibility back to their stakeholders. Where is that spend going? So they can actually map it back to what capabilities they're getting, what value they're getting, how much is going in supporting, let's say, legacy processes or legacy systems, and then what aligns to strategic. And so when I've asked a lot of different organizations, like how much of your spend aligns to your strategic initiatives, many times they don't know. But if they do know, it usually ends up being more in the 15 to 20%, just a very small proportion. And PwC did a study, and what they found was that it wasn't necessarily that more money led to greater IT or modernization success. It was the greater percentage or allocation of spend that allocated to strategic planning, strategic initiatives, so you're working on the right things and everyone was in the same boat rowing together, that's what led into the success. So I think many times you got to help them find that money versus just asking for it.
Joanne, I appreciate it does sometimes feel like IT modernization is just another buzzword that's come down there, and goodness knows in technology we love our buzzwords. But I really love how Ann talked about, hey, before we start talking about technology, what are we trying to do? And then you find the technology that works with it. It feels like one way of avoiding ending up in that buzzword, we have to modernize because we have to modernize kind of framework. Right?
That's true, but then that brings up the other problem with, besides money, is time. And as Bridget pointed out, the time gets harder when we lose our staffing and we're forced to find ways to get that. How do you determine what you need? Well, somebody has to sit down and spend a fair amount of time working it out. So it is tough, I think, to just kind of throw it out there that you have to do it without thinking about how you can get the resources. And we went through, as I mentioned, we're actually going through a modernization process essentially and I was able to find the time by hiring consultants, talking to my systems people and saying, you can't do it, you've tried it, let's bring people in. But again, that still takes some time to bring people in and talk to them and decide what it is that we need. So there's no snap easy answer to this. And unfortunately, the government only works under snap easy answers because our budgets are pretty set and don't allow for a lot of give and take.
Bridget, how are you finding folks dealing with? There's been some money attached to the Management and NITAAC Act and things that is going through GSA and putting out in some ways. But I know there's a lot of concern. Everyone's saying modernize, but a lot of folks, in fact, Mary Ellen kind of noted, hold on, show me the money, right?
Well, absolutely. People are being told specifically, let's go to the cloud. But for us to, and this is where Joanne and I, try to help, CIOs with this and in coming up with ways to, leverage the federal spend to reduce pricing and also try to, put procurement of vehicles in place to through our GWACs or catalogs or government-wide strategic solutions, so that it will help with that modernization. But as Joanne talked about, I'm struggling with the same thing. I've got a legacy system. I've got to it's at the end of life. I've got to upgrade it and modernize, and from a perspective of O&M costs, and you've got to determine those systems that are at the end of life, or are just too expensive to maintain anymore, and try to find the money.
Yeah. And yet I keep hearing a lot of folks talking about the percentage of agency budgets that's on operations and maintenance compared to, it's hard to do new things when you're still using old stuff that's really designed for different for uses that have changed a lot, and certainly they have changed a lot, right, Bridget?
They do. I mean, think about, in the discussion we talked about workforce as well. I'm not an IT person, but think about, we used to have a lot of developers, and we would spend our money, developing these customized systems and now, we're trying to move to an open source, because we used to get locked in to a certain contractor or a certain type of code, and that in itself could be very expensive to have to maintain, and so I'm in that position right now, and still upgrading and modernizing my systems.
I want to switch the topic just a little bit, and Chris, one of the big challenges that Francesca mentioned was, how do you decide what to modernize? Because a lot of agencies, very well, a lot of agencies are going in like, okay, just let's replace it all. Can we start over? How do you decide where to start, what to begin with?
That's a good question. So what a lot of organizations have done is they've started back into what are the capabilities they actually need, and then have rated how well they're delivering against that. What processes support those capabilities, and what systems support those capabilities. And what they're able to do then is to start rationalizing against each of those aspects. How many users am I servicing? How many transactions am I processing with that particular system? How many capabilities does each system provide me, or do I have certain systems that only do literally one thing, that don't have a lot of users associated to them, that have a really high cost associated to that? So I can start finding where are my pockets where I can start freeing up money, and then leveraging, what I really like about the new Modernizing Government Technology Act is that if I can free up that money, I get to keep it. I get to put it into my bank and then draw back from that. So I'm not just losing it, right? Saving costs to save somebody else some money down the road. So that factors on into it. And then if you can go through it and identify as well is what are my interdependencies, then I can figure out where are my pockets for success. And so what we've heard a lot from agencies is that they want to get some quick wins going. They want to be able to show that they can start doing these types of projects in shorter windows. The term common right now is minimum viable product, right? So I can get my success and demonstrate that and then grow, versus targeting a whole bunch of stuff that ends up leading me into a very large project again, that then I'm way down the road before I start seeing some value to it, start seeing some of those savings. So if you can collect all that data, you can then start aligning it back to your initiatives, figure out which ones make the most sensible investment and minimize your risk, that increase your likelihood of success, that you manage your interdependencies, and then go do those projects and then repeat that and start building your credibility to it.
And I'm going to ask you how you guys decide, and I'm going to add where to spend your money and where you start. But I'm going to also add in Jacqueline's question, which I think is related to this. She says, with so many IT challenges taking place at such a rapid pace, how can things ever be modernized? And again, another way of saying, where do we even begin? It feels like we have to, we want to scratch it all and just do over, which of course is not possible either. How do you decide where to begin?
In our organization, we started with the conversation with the business. So we went out and we talked about the different capabilities, the different pain points, and looked at the disruptions that were on the near horizon and how we were going to be successful given the fact that we had such a high cost for maintaining the legacy systems, and we would never be nimble or flexible enough to take on the challenges that were out there. So it was through this strategic alignment with the business about understanding those needs that got us to picking off one of the first 5 ones that we've done in since 2016.
Joanne oh my goodness, I lost my names here. Sorry. Joanne or Bridget, do you want to comment on how you decide where to begin? Neither.
So as I mentioned, we're kind of doing our own, update, yep. And I think having somebody come, I think it's been said, I think that you have to not just go in and say, I'm going to buy some things and suddenly that's going to modernize you. You got to look at what is your goal? Is it security? Is it cost? Which is probably not necessarily a good goal on itself, because it's still going to cost you something to modernize. But you can get more secure. You could get, in our case, we were mostly concerned about disaster recovery and being able to be highly available. So we felt we needed to do that. So we came up with what our goals were, and then brought in a consultant who was not the person who was going to actually build or give us the systems, but would tell us what we might need. So we were not, we weren't tied into a specific company. You have to be careful that you don't want to just have somebody come in and say, oh yes, I have the answer, and you first want to find out, what are all the actual possibilities out there? Because there's a lot of, as I mentioned before, what is modernization? There's a lot of meanings behind that, and just having someone come in and say, I'll modernize, without actually thinking about what it is you want to get done, isn't necessarily going to solve your problem. So a lot of that's, and then you get back to the original problem I mentioned, which is not just money, it's time and resources to spend to do that, and that's not something that people should think is easy.
Yeah, well, and that's one of my senses is a lot of people think, oh, I'll just modernize and then it'll be easier. It's a lot of work to get from point A to point Z on that path. It's not. If it were that easy, everyone would be doing it. Bridget, do you want to add anything? Because I think this is one of the big things where people say, hey, I have so much, and you can really get overwhelmed about just how do I do this? And there's also a role of the customer, whether it be an internal customer or your external, a citizen customer. You want to have them involved too, don't you?
Absolutely. You've got to have your customer involved. And, I totally agree with what Joanne had mentioned. You don't want to take on everything. You can't do it. You've got to, really figure out what your future requirements are, because in the federal government we want to build a system that's going to be around for a little while. It's kind of like Ann mentioned the car. We don't want to buy another car next year, because first of all, we've got to train everybody on the new system. We've got to think about the customer's needs. We want to make sure that we're modernizing the right things. Joanne was really smart to bring someone in to kind of do an assessment and determine, a kind of like a roadmap of where they're going for probably the next couple of years. And that's a good starting point.
Yeah. It used to be called an enterprise architecture, right? Now we don't like that word. But it's a similar kind of thing. Where do we want to be when we get through with this process? One of the other concerns, and again, Francesca brought it up.
Let me add in on that, just that comment a little bit on the enterprise architecture, because this is one of my biggest things that I think is so important, and this is Ann Bruner from Washington State, by the way.
Yep.
When I hired our enterprise architect, I said, I don't need you to be in a corner making me all these models and being the no man when somebody comes with an idea. His first task was to go out and meet with every executive manager in our organization and talk about what's happening in their business. I think enterprise architecture is setting the table for the organization to understand part of its direction, part of its pain points, and understanding what the customers are asking on a day-to-day basis. And that partnership that enterprise architect has within the business and is seen and is visible and can articulate how things potentially, then how solutions would be integrated, is such a big part about how we choose what we modernize, when we might modernize that, and that it's driving to the goals that the organization needs to be focused on. So to me, enterprise architecture is a big key about knowing when to modernize and what to modernize. So like you can tell my passion around that whole thing. So for letting me share.
If you have an enterprise architect who actually does that you should tell actually don't tell their name, because everybody will want to hire that person. So maybe keep it to yourself. But congratulations on being able to do that. That's very powerful. I wanted to bring in a question from Ravi, who says one of the ways that a lot of folks are looking at doing this is using either modular procurement or agile, and he mentions that this is really advocated by GSA's 18F. Is this a way of dealing with some of these things? And Chris, I'll have you start on this. Is agile something that helps with IT modernization? Is it this more modular procurement approach where we're not doing everything in the waterfall big bang way that we have done things for so long?
So definitely, we've seen a big shift, especially just over the last 12 months, that have been shifting towards this. And even in conversations that we have with different agencies, is that they have adopted into this, not just the procurement side of it, but also the delivery. Like the whole expectation is changing around to how they go about towards their projects. So they've been going through and looking at what is that minimum viable product, what gets me to success first. And let me throw out all those complicated use cases. What gets me 80% of the way there? And let me just prove that out first. Let everyone interact with that. And then that next batch, the next module, if you will, the next procurement cycle, is that they'll then enhance that to either grow from adoption to, okay, let's go get these other user groups or other constituents to start using this, or to go through and add a new functionality. And it's broken down into smaller sprints. And so it's raising up a lot more visibility to, am I successful? Am I achieving what I wanted to do? But do I have a good approach that lets me continue to go through and enhance? And I'll emphasize this, am I selecting things that let me be built to change, to evolve, as opposed to doing another modernization effort that then locks me in again? That then a couple of years from now we start talking about doing another modernization effort, then another modernization effort, right? And so I do think that there is a lot of value in the approach. The requests that we've seen from proposals have been much more crisp, much more specific, as people know, and then people are taking a lot more ownership to it. So I do think it's been a good approach to how you take on these modernization efforts, and then just making sure that you've got a platform or an architecture that is going to evolve with you. And then the only other thing I'd emphasize is making sure that when you do that, you leverage wherever you have existing investments, that you just don't throw everything out, right? And so it's modernization over time.
Bridget, modular, agile, is there a connect here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the contracting community It's kind of a twist for them, you know. But I know here at the NITAAC, you know, I'm a contracting officer, and you know, for managing an IT GWAC organization, you know, we're trying to help contracting officers through this shift of, you know, you don't have to put everything in this you've got to leave some room and use different approaches to ensure that we can support the IT modernization. So, I mean, you know, it's going to be a learning process for the contracting community as well. And I know ATNF has really taken a big bite on trying to do that. And you know, I'm going to try to do that as well.
Yeah, and I think everyone thinks, oh, I'll do Agile and it's so easy. There's a lot more communication that goes on amongst the entire organization. So sometimes that's a different way of working as well that folks aren't always used to. Joanne, Agile, is this something that speaks to the people thinking about this? Does it matter?
Well, I'll take issue with another word. Agile is agile, and what does it mean? I think in the government, in some ways we're always agile because the budget is so uncertain and forces it, perhaps in a negative way, in that you have to be constantly changing your plans, and then planning in the last month of the fiscal year to actually spend the money. And
right.
So hopefully the latest. And I'm not a big budget person, so I don't know how much, but the concept of having a 2-year budget, you know, having some stability would be really nice. I think it would help a lot of our customers at least be able to plan out. They don't all want to come in and spend it all at once. They'd rather spend it in a thoughtful way, but they're sometimes stuck not being able to be agile because they have to change, because suddenly the money's there and tomorrow it might not be. So I think that's
wouldn't it be nice not to have to spend time, energy, effort, and money on planning for a shutdown that may or may not happen. Just
well,
not the best
too.
way to spend money. So if we can have a space around that, that's awesome.
But it also hurts because you're in October and you want to plan for the year and you really can't. And so it's not just that you're just planning for the shutdown, but you can't even necessarily plan to buy in a thoughtful way. So to modernize, in the ways we've been talking about it, getting somebody in, getting a plan together, that takes some stability in your budgeting process, and so that hopefully, again, maybe we're moving that way with this 2-year budget idea, and I hope that helps. I know our customers come to us often and say, well, I want to buy this now, but I'm not sure when I'm going to have the money. I want, how can I get things started, and be ready when the money does come, if it comes, and that makes you be agile in your own way.
Yep. Anne, have you guys used Agile much at all? Are you looking at modular procurements kind of thing?
We started adopting Agile about 8 years ago. Even in our legacy environments, that helped us to speed up a lot of differences with the business because of the demonstrations and quick turnarounds. It was, I would agree with Bridget, that it's a little bit different when you bring in a vendor and they've not operated that way, especially on a COTS system. But we have been successful on the last 3 modernization efforts to use Agile, and that helped speed up the overall delivery and to keep things tight about what we were going to deliver. So I am a big proponent about Agile in the environment.
I wanted to bring in 2 questions that are somewhat closely related in that they're both touch on cloud, because I think a lot of people hear IT modernization and what they think is immediately cloud. Dolores asks what would be considered an interoperable solution as it pertains to cloud solutions through shared services. And Jessica asks, Jessica, I'm going to trim down your question a little bit. They're moving to a financial system, and they selected a cloud-based provider, but it's not gone 100% cloud-based. So there's, how do you deal with cloud being on-prem or not on-prem, those kinds of things. I'm going to ask you sort of broadly about cloud, because I think so often IT modernization and cloud feel like they go so closely aligned, where they sometimes can be almost one and the same. And Joanne, I'll have you start by talking a little bit about the cloud. Talk about the cloud.
Oh, talk about the cloud.
Yeah.
Again, the cloud is just a word, and it can mean so many different things, and I think can be overblown in terms of what it can provide. And I'm one that uses it. So, we're modernizing. Part of it is local, just more systems, virtualizing our own systems. But for those pieces that clearly don't have to be here, we're using software as a service for a number of our activities, and trying to build upon the infrastructure that gives us. But as with anything, you have to be careful and ask what is the purpose, and what's out there, and how secure is it, and does it match your business and what you need to do to go to the cloud with what you have. So a ticketing system is a cloud system, because everybody does that. That's an easy thing. The IRS doing a specific legacy financial system may not ever get to the cloud because it's so specific to what they do. Or satellites at NASA, there may be things that you have to have in-house. So there's always going to be a mixture. You have to be very be careful and go where your business leads you, not where the words lead you.
Chris, you, I'm sure, have looked at this. How does one meander their way and make the best decision?
Yes, and so many times people are exactly in that situation where they've identified a few things, even like ticket systems, case management systems. Going to the cloud can pose some challenges if you want it to go beyond just the case tracking, but also then integrate to your on-premise systems, tie in some additional data, or if there's a business process that needs to kick a process along the line, but that system's on-premise. We call it hybrid integration, where parts out in the cloud, parts on-premise. And there's a nuance to cloud, which is, organizations taking their systems and moving to the cloud, but as a private cloud. So they're moving to like the Azures and AWSs of the world, but they're not moving to a SaaS, software as a service cloud system. So when we've been engaged on those types of problems, it's been in how do I connect securely back into my infrastructure. Sometimes those legacy systems do not have an open way of communicating. They may be like a flat file interoperability that they're used to doing, whereas in the cloud they're looking more for it to be an API-led integration. So how can we put a wrap around that and then put security so that it is controlled for that? And the other piece that we see is when people still have those on-premise systems, legacy or modern, because there's definitely workloads that just they're never going to move. Like the IRS was mentioned, but different agencies have got different requirements that they can't move it up into the cloud. And it's how do I then interact with those other cloud services that aren't quite as high security? Can I monitor that? And so we've had agencies that have connected in just directly, give developers, full access, but then they lose that traceability to who's calling out the cloud services. So how do I put monitoring in place so that I can control that and shut it down if necessary, if there's a identified security threat, et cetera. So, the overall theme, though, is how do I have a good, solid hybrid integration approach, and then you can build out from there and do it successfully.
Chris, I want to follow up with you because one of the big challenges, and Francesca mentioned it earlier, is taking this old stuff, which it often is old, and connecting it with the newer stuff, and cloud being an example. And I think Joanne mentioned early on satellites, right? We can't bring the satellite down and add new software, build a new modern. The satellite is a satellite. That's an extreme case to something that a lot of agencies face. They have systems that are old and have been working for a long time, and they just can't really be down. So how do you connect the old and the new in a way that works and is effective and frankly doesn't get you in trouble?
Yeah, so obviously I think that the more connectivity you add, sometimes the more load you're going to introduce as stress. And so as an example I would use off of this is, I think we're all familiar with the American Healthcare Act, and when the ACA first launched the healthcare.gov exchange. And that was an example where it needed to connect to a lot of different back-end systems, including the IRS, to be able to figure out eligibility. And then as it launched, it immediately came to a crash because the load was so large. And what was happening was, at the end of the day, it was connecting to those back-end systems. It was trying to cache a little bit of information. And with the load, it started hitting those databases. And those databases became overwhelmed. And then you ran into a lot of contention. And the solution set, and I'm just familiar with this story because we provided some of the technology there that changed that around in those first 2 weeks when all of a sudden, light switch went on and it was up and running, is we brought in our caching solution that then moved it all into memory. And it no longer hit those back-end systems, those back-end databases directly. It just used the cache version, and then it handled that load up to, I think it had 170,000 concurrent users at that point. So there are ways to take your legacy systems and still leverage their data, et cetera, extrapolate that out. You can do it through caching, you can do it through APIs. We do a very secure wrap around that, so you can manage all your onboarding, who's going to consume the information, et cetera, and then expose it on out. And yet they still leverage all those existing systems in the back-end side. They didn't have to go through that modernization effort. It was just a connection point. And so we've done the same thing with various mainframe systems, et cetera, because there's a lot of cost that you could introduce if you expose your mainframe to all these users coming into a website trying to hit it directly, because you're paying for the cycles at that point. Is that you can, again, move that off and cache that on through and wrap it. So there's definitely a lot of different ways. It sort of depends on the problem you're trying to do.
Anne or Bridget, do you want to comment either on the connecting the old to the new or the whole cloud? Either of those. We're running out of time, so I want to get one or two more questions in. But if you guys want to address either of those issues.
No, I'm okay with that.
Awesome. Then I'm going to, two last questions. One is, Mary asked this early on, and I've been kind of saving it until the end, because it always feels sometimes part of the challenge here is convincing the people above, and the people below, that IT modernization is important. And how do you, her question is, what words will convince the agency head to support the budget for modernization of IT? I'd expand words to maybe a phrase, but how do you, and I don't even think it's just head, because sometimes people below say, hey, I'm connected to the system, I've used it for a long time, my phrase always is, we all love change as long as we can keep doing things the same way we always have. How do you both work up and work down, because it's a big challenge in what magic words do you have to sell IT modernization?
I will go back to the part of my passion around the enterprise architecture and helping the business to talk about their experiences, their goals for their customers, and it's their words that they come to realize that they need something more than what they have. And then it's with those kinds of discoveries that helps me to then bring in the discussion about how we might modernize and when we might modernize and what does that look like to the business as a whole. So it's really their words that have been the most impactful to persuading how we would move from something that's over 30 years to a more modern platform that solves the problems that they're facing.
Bridget, how do you tell folks that this matters? It's
very difficult sometimes. But if you come up with a good case and you've done your homework, you've done the assessment, you've got the data to show that you might have cost savings if you move to a new system, and that you're going to also obtain better services for your customers. That always helps.
Chris or Joanne, did you want to comment on this, or I was going to give him one last question?
No, go ahead with your last
question. Let me ask. Okay. Well, I was just going to ask you, in our moments left, I'm going to ask all of you, and I'll start with you, Joanne. We've discussed so many things about IT modernization. What one thing would you hope people take away with them as they move forward? What should they really remember as they are thinking about IT modernization?
To start with, what is it you're trying to get done, and to look for some outside assistance in determining that if need be, because it's important to not just jump into something without knowing why and what the end result will be.
Awesome. Anne, what one thing do you hope people take away?
Remember, you're not in it just by yourself, and it takes the partnership and the collaboration. And I think to leverage your customers, because they can really help to support not only your funding, but the persuasion of the impact that they feel from the services sometimes that we deliver. So don't forget to think of them and ask them for the help in that modernization effort.
Awesome. Bridget, what one thing would you hope people take away?
Well, unfortunately, Anne and Joanne took part of my answer, but I will say, I also would say that, you're not alone in this, and everybody deals with this. So, leverage that experience from other organizations in helping you through this. And, don't be afraid to ask for some outside source of, outside help to work through this.
Yeah. Chris, bring it home, wrap it all up in a nice big bow and tie it all up so we can take it away with us.
Sure thing. Well, a lot of great advice there. I'm totally in agreement. Looking at that portfolio, customer focused, and measuring that transformation, measuring that change, so you get your benefits to it. But the other piece I would look at when you're looking at modernization is just don't forget that there is also an integration aspect, that everything doesn't flip on a dime. You've got a lot of investment already made today that you can try and leverage and do those changes over time, and then do it thoughtfully so that you're not doing it where you're going to have to modernize again in a few years. Is that you've got a platform, so to speak, that you can go through and it's built to change versus being that statically built to last.
Awesome. Joanne, Anne, Bridget, and Chris, thank you all for doing this. Really appreciate it. This is GovLoop's Dorobek Insider Live, brought to you by Software AG. I want to re-thank our guests, Joanne Wojtek with NASA SEWP, Anne Bruner with the state of Washington, Bridget Gower with NITAAC, and Chris Boneman with Software AG, Government Solutions, and of course Francesca Elatresh of GovLoop. A few reminders. We will have a write-up taken from this discussion posted on GovLoop's Dorobek Insider in the days ahead, and we'll have additional backgrounds and stuff for you to, a collection of links and things. And we will also email you an on-demand version of this discussion in the days ahead. The producers of GovLoop's Dorobek Insider Live are Steph Driscoll and Emily Jarvis. Thanks so much. We are back in March, Wednesday, March 14th to be exact, and we're discussing cybersecurity. I hope you'll join us. I'm Christopher Dorobek. Thanks. Great questions from you guys, by the way. Really awesome. I mean, we're leaving a bunch on the table, but you guys really asked great questions. So thank you for doing that. You make my job much easier. So thank you for that. I am Christopher Dorobek. Thanks for being here. Go out, do good work.